Adrian Whitmore came home with a husband who had been forgotten, but the woman waiting for him in the living room was no longer the wife who would apologize easily. That night, with just one sentence, Evelyn cracked the entire calm surface he had carried in with him. It was nearly midnight, and the old house in Beacon Hill was wrapped in the pale, cold silence of a Boston winter. Outside the window, the streetlight spilled a golden glow over wet stone. Wind moved through the bare trees, carrying a faint sound, like the whisper of a city that had grown used to secrets hidden behind beautiful windows. Evelyn Harper sat in the living room, her back straight, both hands resting on the open book in her lap. She had held that same posture for nearly an hour, but she had not managed to read a single line. The words lay still before her eyes, meaningless, like every explanation she had once forced herself to believe throughout this marriage. On the coffee table, her phone lay face down. Inside it were 3 calls that had changed everything. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She did not pace the room like women in films do when they are about to face the truth. She simply sat there, so calm she almost felt unfamiliar to herself. Because some kinds of pain make a person break open the moment they arrive, but other kinds go too deep, past even tears, and freeze into a terrifying clarity. The key turned in the lock. That sound had once meant someone was coming home. Before, Evelyn would have stood up, asked Adrian if he was hungry, if he was tired, how the trip had been. She had once loved the small details of what looked like an ordinary marriage. The sound of a coat being hung, the sound of shoes touching the floor, the familiar scent of his cologne mixing with the cold air from outside. But tonight, she did not stand. The door opened. Then it closed harder than necessary. Adrian Whitmore appeared in the doorway of the living room. He was still wearing the charcoal gray suit that had wrinkled during the long flight from Charleston. His tie was loose at his neck, his hair slightly disheveled, his face hollow from lack of sleep. To anyone else, he might have looked like an overworked man, a tired husband returning after many days of carrying responsibilities. But Evelyn saw something else. She saw anger already prepared. She saw the role he had chosen. She saw a man entering his home not to reunite, but to accuse before he could be questioned. "Evelyn," he said. Her name sounded dry and heavy. "Welcome home," she replied. Her voice was very soft. Not cold. Not warm. Simply clear. Adrian looked at her for several seconds. He had expected confusion. He had expected a hurried apology. He had expected the familiar woman to immediately recognize his mood and try to soften it. For years, Evelyn had lived that way. She had learned how to read Adrian's silences, learned how to avoid questions that made him uncomfortable, learned how to turn her own loneliness into understanding for him. The Whitmore family had always valued that. They called her refined. They called her sensible. They said Adrian was lucky to have a wife who did not like making noise. They did not know that silence also has a memory. Adrian stepped into the room and placed his leather bag beside the chair. "That is all you have to say." Evelyn closed the book. "What do you want me to say?" The question made him pause. A flash of irritation crossed his eyes. Adrian had always hated it when Evelyn answered a question with a question. It made the conversation slip out of his hands. He gave a dry laugh. 16 days, Evelyn. I was in Charleston for 16 days, working from morning until night, meeting clients, handling contracts, flying back and forth between meetings. And through all of that, you did not call me once. The room fell silent. Evelyn looked at him. She recognized that tone. It was not too loud, but it was sharp enough. Not fully explosive, but enough to push the other person into defending themselves. Adrian never began with shouting. He began with disappointment presented as moral evidence. He took another step. Not one call, not one message asking if I was all right. Do you know what that feels like? Coming back to a hotel room after a long day, looking at your phone, and realizing your wife does not even wonder how you are living. Inside Adrian, fear had mixed with anger. He had flown home with a very clear script. If he attacked first, Evelyn would retreat. If he made himself look wounded, she would apologize. If she apologized, he would have time. Time to arrange things. Time to hide more carefully whatever had begun to come loose. But Evelyn did not retreat. She placed the book on the table. I did call. A very short sentence. Adrian stopped. What? I did call you. More than once. The irritation on his face turned into confusion in a blink. Then he quickly pulled it back into disbelief. No. My phone has no calls from you. I know. Then what are you talking about? Evelyn stood. The yellow light fell across her face, making her eyes look deeper. She was not tall, not imposing like her mother-in-law, and she did not have the icy voice of people accustomed to giving orders in boardrooms. But in that moment, she had a kind of power Adrian had never prepared himself to face. She had the truth. I did not call your work phone, she said. I called the other phone. The room seemed to lose its air. Adrian said nothing. But Evelyn saw everything. She saw his hand tighten slightly. She saw the color fade from his face. She saw his eyes, which had always known how to hold calm, suddenly shift too quickly, as if searching for an exit. What phone? He asked. His voice was lower than before. Evelyn walked to the coffee table and picked up her phone, but she did not unlock the screen. She did not need to look. She remembered every detail. The black phone with the dark brown leather case, the lower edge scratched. You usually keep it in the inside pocket of your coat, on the left side. You never put it on the table. You never charge it in front of me. You never mention it. Adrian stood motionless. Inside his mind, secret doors began slamming shut one after another. That phone was the boundary, the private bridge between the two halves of his life, the ones he believed he could keep separate forever. Boston on one side, Charleston on the other, Evelyn on one side. The person on the other side. He had never thought Evelyn would find that number. He had certainly never thought she would call it. Evelyn continued, more slowly now. The first time I called, a little girl answered. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second. Evelyn, listen to me. No. Tonight, it is my turn to speak. The sentence was not loud, but it was so final, it silenced him. The little girl asked who I was. I asked if I could speak to you. She said her father was busy. Then I heard a woman in the background calling the little girl's name, Sophie. The child's name seemed to pull Adrian out from under himself. Sophie. Evelyn did not say that name with anger. She said it very gently, and that gentleness made it hurt more. She did not want to turn a child into a crime. Sophie was not at fault. But the girl's hidden existence had revealed a truth Adrian could not decorate with any explanation. She called you Daddy, Evelyn said. Adrian opened his eyes. There was real panic in his gaze, but Evelyn knew the fear was not entirely for her. It was for the moment when everything he had arranged so carefully began to collapse. He spoke very quietly. Sophie is my daughter. There was no thunder, no glass breaking, no tragic music. Only that sentence, lying bare in the luxurious living room, cutting Evelyn's life in two, before and after. She stood still. How old is she? Adrian looked down. 7. 7 years old. A small number, but it opened a long corridor of memories. The trips to Charleston that had stretched longer than expected. The weekends Adrian said he could not come home. The times he turned off his phone because of meetings. The dinners Evelyn ate alone. The nights she blamed herself for feeling the marriage drifting away, even though she could not point to proof. 7 years was not a brief mistake. 7 years was a life. Adrian stepped closer. Evelyn, this is not as simple as you think. She looked at him. The man all of Boston had praised as mature, reliable, exemplary. The man who had stood beside her at fundraisers, his hand resting lightly on her back, smiling as if he were the safest roof in the world. Not simple, she repeated. No, maybe it is not simple for you. Because you have to remember whom you lied to, where, and with which phone. But to me, it is very clear. His face went pale. Clear, how? Evelyn placed the phone back on the table. You were not simply away for work. You had another life. And tonight, you walked in here to accuse me of not caring, while you were the one who kept me outside the truth of my own life. Adrian had no answer. For the first time in years, he did not have the right words ready at the right time. Evelyn felt pain rising inside her, but she did not let it sweep her away. She had been underestimated for too long. By Adrian. By his family. Perhaps even by herself. They thought her softness meant she could be bent easily. They thought her silence meant she did not see. They thought a woman who loved her husband would always choose forgiveness before choosing herself. But tonight, Evelyn was no longer the elegant shadow inside the Whitmore house. She was the woman who had called the secret phone. She was the woman who had heard a child speak the truth adults had tried to hide. She was the woman standing before her husband. And she was not apologizing for knowing. She asked, her voice low but clear, "What is Sophie's mother's name?" Adrian looked at her for a long time. All the layers of polish, exhaustion, and defensiveness fell from his face one by one. What remained was only a man caught by the truth. "Mara," he said. "Mara Bennett." Evelyn gave a small nod. A name, a child, a secret phone. That was enough to make this house no longer feel like the place she once thought she belonged. Outside the window, Boston was still cold and beautiful. The streetlights still burned. Life beyond the glass continued as if nothing had happened. But inside Evelyn, an old page had been torn out of the book of her life. She did not know how much the next chapter would hurt, but she knew one thing. From this moment on, Adrian Whitmore would no longer be the only one with the right to tell their story. The thought stayed still in Evelyn's mind, like a lamp suddenly switched on in a dark room. It did not drive away the pain, but it gave her enough light to see the true shape of everything that had once been hidden beneath the beautiful fabric of marriage. A secret phone, a woman's name, a 7-year-old child, a husband who had come home playing the role of the forgotten man. When he was the one who had kept Evelyn outside the truth for years, Adrian still stood before her. But he no longer looked like the man who had entered the living room with anger carefully prepared. His shoulders had dropped. The hand that had once clenched tight now hung at his side. His gray eyes looked at her, then turned away, as if there was too much light in this room. Evelyn looked at him and realized something that made her heart grow colder. Adrian was not only afraid of losing her, he was afraid of losing control. For years, he had controlled the distance between Boston and Charleston, between the main phone and the secret phone, between the lawful wife and the woman who had his child. He had controlled the story by deciding who was allowed to know what, who could ask how far, and who had to stay silent so everything could remain peaceful. Tonight, that story had slipped out of his hands. "Mara Bennett," Evelyn repeated. Adrian gave a slight nod. It was very small, but enough to confirm it. The name was no longer a shadow. It had sound. It had weight. It had a place in his life that Evelyn had never been allowed to see. "Who is she?" Adrian raised a hand and rubbed his face. Under the living room light, he looked older than he had when he walked in. Not older because of time, but because a role carried for too long had finally begun to weigh on his bones. "Mara is someone I knew before," he said, "long before we were married." Evelyn waited. She did not interrupt. Her silence now was no longer surrender. It was pressure. It forced Adrian to hear his own words as he said them. He continued, his voice low. "We met in Charleston, back when I was working on my first projects there. Things between her and me were complicated. Then I met you. Everything changed so fast. My family, my work, the wedding. I thought I could arrange it." "Arrange it," Evelyn said. Only one phrase, but it made Adrian falter. "I know that sounds awful. It does not sound awful. It shows that you treated people like items on your schedule." Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to say he was not that kind of man. But this room already held too much evidence of arrangement. Evelyn here, Mara in Charleston, Sophie in a life he entered and left. All of them placed into separate boxes so Adrian could move back and forth without anyone seeing the whole picture. Evelyn picked up her phone. The screen lit, but she did not unlock it. She only looked at the black glass reflecting her own face. A calm face, but with eyes that had changed. "Do you know the strangest part?" she asked. "When I first heard Sophie's voice, I did not think about hating her. I only thought, her voice is so clear. She has no idea she just said something that could change another person's life." Adrian closed his eyes. When she mentioned Sophie, his face softened by instinct. Evelyn saw it. It was the reflex of a father, not false, not calculated. And because it was real, it hurt her more. "So you love her," she said. Adrian opened his eyes. "Of course I love Sophie." The answer came out immediately, without hesitation. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then do you understand? If you love her, you should have given her a clearer truth. If you ever loved me, you should have given me the right to know that truth. And if you ever cared about Mara, she should not have had to live for years inside a relationship with no clear name." Each sentence seemed to push Adrian back. He went to the nearby chair but did not sit down. He placed his hand on the back of it, gripping lightly as if looking for something to hold on to. "I did not know how to keep from hurting anyone." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. "No, Adrian, you knew, but that way required you to lose something. And you did not want to lose anything." The room fell completely still. Outside, a car passed along the wet street. Its headlights swept quickly across the wall, then disappeared. In that brief wash of light, Evelyn saw Adrian's face clearly. No anger left, no steadiness left. Only a man being forced to see the consequences of always choosing the easier path. She asked, "What does Sophie know about me?" Adrian pressed his lips together. "Not much. Do not answer me as if I am a client in a meeting." He breathed out heavily. "She knows I live in Boston. She knows I've worked there. She probably knows about you. Mara does not speak badly of you. Neither do I." The last sentence made Evelyn laugh very softly. "You think that is kindness? Not speaking badly of the wife you kept outside the truth of her own marriage." Adrian lowered his head. "I did not want to confuse her. But you created the confusion." This time, he did not argue. Evelyn walked closer to the window. Her hand touched the cold curtain. Boston beyond the glass was still beautiful in its indifference. The old houses lay quiet under the streetlights, curtains drawn across windows, other families perhaps asleep, believing tomorrow would look like today. Evelyn had once believed that too, that a marriage could wear down a little and still be real, that a busy man could grow distant and still remain faithful to the truth, that the small doubts inside her were only the product of loneliness. Now everything had a name: Mara, Sophie, Charleston. She turned back. "When did you know Mara was pregnant?" Adrian did not answer right away. The delay itself was an answer. Evelyn felt her heart sink. "Before the wedding, wasn't it?" Adrian closed his eyes. "Evelyn, wasn't it?" He opened his eyes. There was shame in them, but Evelyn could no longer tell how much of it was shame for what he had done, and how much was shame because he could no longer hide it. "Yes," he said very quietly, "I knew before the wedding." The room did not break apart. There was no sound large enough for that moment. But inside Evelyn, a row of memories collapsed like framed pictures falling from the wall. The wedding dress in Newport, the sea wind, the Whitmore pearl brooch, Adrian standing at the end of the aisle, smiling like a man certain of the future, her father placing her hand into his, her mother crying with happiness, Beatrice watching everything with cold satisfaction. And Adrian had known. He had known another woman was carrying his child. Evelyn placed a hand on the edge of the table to keep herself steady. She did not want to fall in front of him, not because of pride, but because she had already been falling for too long inside a life built from things she had not known. "You married me while knowing Sophie was coming into this world." Adrian stepped forward. I panicked. I thought if I said anything, everything would collapse. My family, my work, you. I know it was cowardly. I know. Evelyn shook her head. No. You were not only cowardly. You made all of us pay for that cowardice. I paid with 7 years of living in a marriage that did not contain the whole truth. Mara paid with 7 years of standing outside any clear place in your life. Sophie paid by having a father who had to divide his time between 2 lives. Adrian lowered his face. His shoulders trembled. But Evelyn did not move closer. Once she would have. She would have touched his hand. Told him they would find a way. She would have cared for his pain before she had even finished looking at her own. But the Evelyn of tonight was different. She understood that Adrian's feelings could not become another curtain draped over the truth. I love you, Adrian said, his voice breaking. That is real. I know you do not believe me, but I love you. Evelyn looked at him. For 1 second, she saw the man she had once loved. Not entirely evil. Not a monster. Just a weak man raised in a world that had always cleared the path for his weakness to become something forgivable. That was what made the tragedy sadder. Maybe you did love me, she said, but love without truth is not a place where I can keep living. Adrian said nothing. The sentence did not end everything immediately, but it drew the first boundary, a thin line, but clear. Evelyn looked at the secret phone in her memory. She saw the unknown number on the screen. She heard Sophie's voice again, asking who she was. That child had no idea she had become the bell that woke a woman from years of doubting herself. She asked the final question of that night in a voice so calm that it frightened Adrian more than any anger. In the past 7 years, every time you said you had to go to Charleston for work, how many times was it really because of Sophie and Mara? Adrian looked at her. His face went white. You do not need to answer, Evelyn said. I can see it on your face. He reached a hand toward her. Evelyn. She stepped back. Do not. Only one phrase. But it closed the door on every old habit. No comforting. No asking for explanations. No allowing him to touch her and blur the truth. Adrian stood still, his hand suspended, then falling back to his side. Evelyn walked to the coffee table and picked up the book. She did not intend to read. She only needed something in her hands to remind herself that she was still here, still standing, still allowed to choose what came next. Tonight, she said, I do not want to hear any more explanations. Adrian looked at her as if he did not understand. Then what do you want? Evelyn lifted her head. Her eyes were clear, exhausted, but no longer weak. I want the truth to stop being controlled by you. Adrian did not answer. And in that silence, Evelyn understood that the old chapter of her life had closed. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. More pain, certainly. More complications, possibly. But at least it would no longer be written through the stories Adrian chose for her. Across the city, the Boston night still stretched on, and inside the living room of the Whitmore house, a woman who had once been underestimated finally began to reclaim the right to tell her own life. Evelyn stood beneath the pale yellow light, the book closed in her hand, but what she was truly holding was not a book. It was a boundary, a thin boundary, newly drawn, but clear enough that Adrian could no longer pretend not to see it. For years, he had grown used to watching her step back in front of his silence, used to her choosing surface peace instead of digging deeper, used to her blaming herself every time she felt that something was wrong. Tonight, Evelyn no longer blamed herself. Adrian stood a few steps away from her, his face drained under the living room light. He had just admitted something no apology could soften. He had known Mara was pregnant before he married Evelyn. He had known a child was about to enter his life. He had known, and still he had stood at the wedding in Newport, smiling, holding Evelyn's hand, speaking vows she had believed were whole. Now, all those vows were like beautiful panes of glass placed under a light too strong. They did not disappear. Their cracks simply became visible. Adrian spoke first, his voice low and hoarse. I do not expect you to understand right away, but I'm asking you not to decide everything while you are in this pain. Evelyn looked at him. This pain is not new, Adrian. Tonight, it simply has a name. He lowered his head. He could not argue with that sentence. Because it was true. Evelyn had been hurting for a long time. She had hurt through dinners alone, unanswered calls. The feeling of standing inside a marriage and still feeling like a polite guest. But back then, Adrian always had an explanation. Work, pressure, family, projects in Charleston, responsibilities Evelyn had been taught to respect. Now she understood. Some explanations are not always complete lies. Sometimes they are only the selected parts of the truth, and sometimes the hidden part is the part that hurts another person the most. Adrian stepped closer. Mara and I are not what you are imagining. It is not that kind of relationship anymore. It is more complicated. Sophie is my daughter. I cannot turn my back on her. Evelyn listened carefully, not because she wanted to be convinced, but because she wanted to understand how he saved himself with language. Adrian did not say he had betrayed her trust. He said everything was complicated. He did not say he had hidden another life. He said he could not turn his back on his child. Those sentences sounded true, and because they contained a portion of truth, they had once been powerful enough to make other people fall silent. But tonight, the true part could no longer cover the wrong part. No one is asking you to turn your back on Sophie, she said. Do not use your love for her to blur the fact that you kept me outside the truth. Adrian stopped. I did not mean it that way, but you still did it. Every time I asked why you were in Charleston longer than expected, you said it was work. Every time I felt you drifting away, you told me I was being sensitive. Every time I tried to come closer, you built a wall and called it professional pressure. You did not just keep a secret. You made me doubt my own instincts. The final sentence made Adrian stay silent longer. In his eyes, Evelyn saw a flicker of recognition. Small, but real. Perhaps for the first time, he understood that her wound did not come only from the existence of Mara or Sophie. It came from the fact that he had let Evelyn live in a room without enough light, and every time she said she could not see clearly, he told her the room was perfectly normal. He lifted a hand to his forehead. I was wrong. I know I was wrong, but I still love you. That was never false. Evelyn felt her heart tighten, not because she believed him immediately, but because a part of her still remembered the days when she had wanted so badly to believe him. Adrian was not a man without feeling. If he had been cold and empty, perhaps everything would have been easier. But he knew how to be gentle. He knew how to care in selected moments. He knew how to look at her in a way that once made her think she was loved. The tragedy was that sometimes real love was still not enough to repair a life built on a lack of honesty. She spoke slowly. Maybe you love me in your way, but your way left me alone for too long. Adrian closed his eyes. I can change. I will change. I will talk to Mara. I will arrange a clearer schedule with Sophie. I will be transparent. I will do everything better. Just do not close the door on me tonight. Evelyn heard a familiar panic in his words. It was not only panic over losing her. It was panic because every system he had built was collapsing at once. Boston was no longer safe. Charleston was no longer separate. Mara was no longer far away in her own private box. Sophie was no longer something that could be named with vague phrases. And Evelyn was no longer the woman standing still in a beautiful room, waiting for him to decide what would be revealed. She placed the book on the table. You have to leave here tonight. Adrian opened his eyes. Evelyn, she kept her voice calm. I am not saying we will solve everything tonight. I am also not saying that tomorrow I will not need a lawyer, documents, time, and the full truth. But tonight, I need a safe space to think. Without you, in this house. Adrian looked at her as if she had said something impossible. This is my house, too. The sentence fell between them, carrying the entire habit of Whitmore power. Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time that night, she felt something steady beneath the pain. She walked to the small table near the door, opened the drawer, and took out a cream-colored envelope. Adrian looked at the envelope. What is that? A copy of the property documents for this house, Evelyn said. This house was purchased with my separate assets before it was used as a shared marital home. You know that. My father knows that. My family's lawyer knows that. If we need to discuss ownership later, we will do it through lawyers. But tonight, I have the right to ask you to leave so things do not get worse. Adrian froze. This was the turn he had not prepared for. Evelyn Harper, the woman he had once thought did not care about paperwork, the woman his mother had once considered too soft to protect herself, had kept proof. Not loudly, not threateningly, just quietly preparing for the day she might need to stand on her own feet. In Adrian's mind, the image of the gentle Evelyn he had leaned on for years did not disappear, but another image now stood beside it. A woman who knew how to listen to her instincts, a woman who remembered the times she had been left behind, a woman who kept documents in the right place, a woman who knew how to say no without raising her voice. He asked very softly, "How long have you kept that?" Evelyn looked at the envelope in her hand. "Since the time you forgot an important appointment with me because of a trip to Charleston." Adrian lowered his face. He did not need to ask which appointment. There had been too many days like that. Too many times when he thought a late apology was enough to stitch everything back together. Evelyn placed the envelope down. "I do not want to argue. I do not want the neighbors to hear. I do not want to turn tonight into a scene that someone can later use to say I lost control. I am being very clear. Take a few necessary things and go to a hotel or to your mother's house. We will deal with the rest later." Those words were safe, calm, and reasonable. Because of that, Adrian had no room to call her emotional. He had once known how to handle tears. He knew how to handle accusations. But Evelyn's prepared calm made him feel his right to define the situation slipping away. He said, almost in a whisper, "I do not want to leave." Evelyn looked at him. For a moment, behind the man who had hurt her, she saw a boy raised to believe he would never truly lose what he wanted. Adrian was not cruel in the sense of enjoying another person's pain, but he was selfish in a more dangerous way. He had grown used to the world bending itself around his fear. She answered, "Then tonight, do the right thing, even if you do not want to." The sentence stood between them like a verdict. Adrian said nothing more. He turned and went upstairs. Evelyn stood in the living room, listening to his footsteps on the wooden floor. The sound of drawers opening, the sound of a travel bag zipper. Every sound was like a note in a slow farewell song. She did not feel relieved immediately. The pain did not leave with him, but the house began to recover its air. A few minutes later, Adrian came back down with a small bag. He stopped at the entrance to the living room, looking at Evelyn as if searching for one final sign of softness. "Can I call you tomorrow?" "No," she said. "If there is something necessary, text me. If it concerns legal matters, I will arrange a representative. If it concerns Sophie, speak to her mother first. Do not put me in a position where I have to handle another story that is still unclear." Adrian swallowed hard. "Do you really want it to end like this?" Evelyn felt the question pass through her, striking years of memory. But it did not pull her back. "No, I do not want it to end like this. But you began it by not letting me know the truth." He had no answer. Evelyn opened the door. The hallway outside was cold and bright. Adrian stepped across the threshold, then stopped. "I'm sorry." She looked at him. That apology might have been real, but the truth was not a key that could immediately reopen every door. "I heard you," she said, "but tonight, I need peace more than an apology." Adrian left. The door closed. There was no slam, no chaos, only a very soft closing sound, almost polite. But to Evelyn, it was the sound of a final boundary being set down. She stood still in the hallway for a long time. Then she locked the door. Once, twice. In the living room, the light was still pale yellow. The book was still on the table. The cream-colored envelope was still there, small but powerful, proof that Evelyn was not entirely empty-handed inside her own life. She sat down in the chair and looked at the house that had once represented a perfect marriage. Tonight, it was no longer perfect. But perhaps for the first time, it was honest. Outside, Boston was still cold. Inside, Evelyn was no longer waiting for Adrian to come home the way she used to. She was waiting for herself to return. That thought stayed with Evelyn until dawn crept across the window frame. The night had passed, but the Beacon Hill house still could not return to being an ordinary home. It was too quiet, too clean, too much like a place staged to conceal its cracks. Every object in the living room seemed to know more than it said. The chair Adrian usually sat in. The bookshelf he had once arranged by the color of the spines. The wedding photograph placed beside the white flowers. Everything was still there, but its meaning had been drained away. Evelyn did not sleep. She sat until the streetlights outside slowly faded, then rose like someone who had survived a soundless storm. Her body ached, her head felt heavy, but beneath that exhaustion was a new layer of clarity. Clarity did not make the pain smaller. It only helped her stop mistaking pain for weakness. She went upstairs to the bedroom. The room still held the cedarwood scent of Adrian's cologne. On the large bed, her side was slightly rumpled, while his side remained smooth to the point of coldness. Evelyn stared at that side of the bed for a long time. Before, she had thought that emptiness was the price of being married to a busy man. Now she understood some absences are not created by work. They are created by the parts of a life hidden somewhere else. She opened Adrian's wardrobe. His suits hung in a straight line. White, pale blue, and silver gray shirts were arranged by shade. Ties were rolled inside a wooden drawer. Leather shoes were polished. Everything was so perfect it almost felt inhuman. Adrian always knew how to make his life look orderly. It was his talent. It was also his most dangerous mask. Evelyn ran her hand along the hangers. She was not sure what she was looking for. Maybe a piece of paper, a photograph, something that proved the unease inside her had not been imagined. Then her hand stopped at a black garment bag hanging deep inside. Adrian's wedding suit. She had not touched it in years. Back then, Adrian had said they should keep it as a beautiful memory. His mother, Beatrice Whitmore, had once said that old families always knew how to honor symbols. At the time, Evelyn had smiled, because she still believed symbols were things that held love up. Now she knew symbols could also be used to decorate a lie. She pulled the garment bag down and unzipped it. The black suit lay inside, still pressed, still elegant, still carrying the solemn air of the day it had once appeared before hundreds of guests. Evelyn touched the lapel. The fabric felt cold beneath her fingertips. A strange sensation moved through her. Not exactly sadness, not exactly anger. It was like touching an object that had once been sacred, only to discover that its sacredness had existed only in the part of you that believed. When she lifted the suit, something small fell to the floor. A soft sound rang out. Evelyn bent down. It was the Whitmore pearl brooch. The pearl in the center was not large, but it glowed faintly, like moonlight trapped inside a shell. Around it, the silver edge was engraved with a tiny W. Beatrice had pinned that brooch onto Evelyn's wedding dress in the room overlooking the sea in Newport. She had said it symbolized loyalty, honor, and the endurance of a marriage. Evelyn had been only 25 then, still young enough to be moved by words spoken in a solemn voice. She held the brooch in her palm. The memory opened, cruelly clear. Newport had been radiant that day. The sea was deep blue in the distance. Wind moved through white curtains. The bridal room was full of the scent of fresh flowers, powder, and anticipation. Evelyn's mother stood behind her, eyes red. Her father remained silent near the window, trying to hide his emotion by adjusting his cuffs again and again. Beatrice entered with a small velvet box. She did not embrace Evelyn. She only looked at her through the mirror, assessing every fold of the dress, every strand of hair, every sign that might prove whether Evelyn was worthy of entering the Whitmore family. Then she opened the box. "Women in this family always wear this brooch on important days," Beatrice said. "It reminds us that marriage is not only emotion, it is honor, responsibility, and steadfastness." Evelyn had believed it was acceptance, a gentle ritual, a hand guiding her into a new family. Now she wondered how much Beatrice had known even then. The memory drew her to the seaside garden where the ceremony had taken place. White chairs stood in perfectly straight rows. Flowers covered the arch. Guests dressed beautifully, spoke softly, smiled at the proper moments. Adrian stood at the end of the aisle, his black suit perfectly fitted, his face calm, like a man who had done everything according to plan. When she walked toward him, he smiled. Evelyn had once thought it was the smile of love. Now she was no longer sure. Perhaps it was the smile of a man hoping no one would open the wrong door behind the stage. At the reception, the first sign had appeared. A small phone of Adrian's vibrated on the table while he was speaking with guests. It was not the familiar work phone. It was another device, thinner, placed near his coat. Evelyn had picked it up only to hand it to him, but the screen lit at exactly that moment. A message appeared from an unknown South Carolina number. "Adrian, call me back when you can. This is very important." There was no name, only that sentence. But inside Evelyn's chest at the time, something had dropped very softly. A small instinct, weak enough that she could easily smother it with reason. And she had. She told herself Adrian had projects in Charleston. She told herself a man like Adrian always had urgent calls. She told herself today was her wedding day, and she should not let one vague message stain everything. Adrian returned, glanced at the screen, then turned the phone off. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He kissed her hair lightly. "Just work. Today is ours. Today is ours." That sentence had once calmed her. Now it sounded like a door being shut too quickly. That night in the wedding suite overlooking the sea, Adrian received another call. He stepped out onto the balcony. His voice was low, but Evelyn still caught a few broken pieces. "Not tonight. I will handle it. Do not worry." When he came back inside, he said there had been a problem with a preservation file in Charleston. He was tired. He was sorry. He held her and said he did not want anything to touch their first night. Evelyn had rested her head against his chest, listened to his heartbeat, and convinced herself that loving someone meant believing them when they said everything was all right. But her body had known even then. Some deep part of her had heard the first bell of truth. Evelyn returned to the present. The bedroom in Beacon Hill was growing brighter. The brooch lay in her hand, cold and small. No new evidence appeared from it. No secret words. No confession. But it unlocked a chain of memories she had forced herself to forget. Small moments, calls ended too quickly, trips to Charleston explained too smoothly. Times Adrian looked at his phone, then put it away before she could ask. A marriage rarely collapses because of one sudden truth. Sometimes it collapses because of hundreds of small signs ignored in order to keep the peace. Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed. She did not want to conclude anything beyond what she knew. She did not want to turn pain into accusations without proof. But she knew one thing clearly. Adrian had known about Sophie before this marriage began, and throughout the years after that, he had let Evelyn live inside a version of life missing half the truth. That was enough to change everything. She placed the brooch inside a small box on the vanity, not as a keepsake, as evidence, as a reminder that some things had been called honor only because no one had been brave enough to call them by another name. Her phone lit up. A message from Adrian. "I know you need time, but we have to talk." Evelyn looked at the words for a long time. Before, a message like that would have softened her. She would have thought he was hurting. She would have thought she should listen. She would have thought a marriage had to be saved through patience. But now, she looked at the box holding the brooch, at the wedding suit lying on the chair, at the room where too many years had been painted over with outward beauty. She did not reply, not because she wanted to punish him, but because for the first time, she was no longer rushing to place Adrian's emotions above her own clarity. Dawn had fully arrived. Outside the window, Boston was cold, pale blue, and clear. Evelyn stood and pulled the curtains open. Light poured into the room, touching every object that had once belonged to a life she thought she understood. She did not yet know what she would do next. But she knew she would not step backward into darkness just because someone called that darkness marriage. And in the new light of that morning, the pearl brooch was no longer a symbol of the Whitmore family. It was the first piece of proof that Evelyn had begun to see the truth with her own eyes. But seeing was only the first step. After the cold light of that morning, Evelyn understood that memories, instincts, and Adrian's half-answers would not be enough to protect her from the Whitmore family. Beatrice could turn every wound into a private matter that needed to stay hidden. Adrian could call betrayal complicated. One day, when lawyers stepped in, when property, reputation, and control over the story were placed on the table, Evelyn could not simply say she had heard a child's voice over the phone. She needed the truth recorded, not to hurt anyone, not to pull a child into a battle between adults, not to turn Mara into the target of her anger. Evelyn reminded herself of that many times as she sat at the kitchen table, in front of a cup of tea that had gone cold. If there was one thing she knew for certain, it was that Sophie was not at fault. That child should not become evidence exposed to the world. She was only the most innocent person in a story the adults had tangled for far too long. So Evelyn did not go online looking for revenge. She did not call her friends to tell the story. She did not post a single line. She did not send photos, did not send threatening messages, did not rush to Charleston blinded by anger. She opened her laptop and searched for a legal investigation firm. Northlight Inquiry appeared in the results with a simple, almost dry interface. No shocking slogans, no promises to expose anyone's secrets. Only one short line made Evelyn pause. The truth must be found with care. Care. That was the word she needed. She called the number on the website. The woman who answered had a low, steady voice, and she was not overly curious. She introduced herself as Vivian Cross. She did not ask sensational questions. She did not gasp with pity. She simply listened as Evelyn said she needed to verify her husband's schedule in Charleston, his connection to a woman named Mara Bennett, and the actual nature of the trips he had always called work. Vivian was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I can meet you this afternoon. And I need to be clear from the beginning. We only work within the law. We do not invade the privacy of minors. We do not approach children. We do not apply pressure. We do not publish personal information." Evelyn closed her eyes. Part of the tension inside her eased. That is exactly what I want. Northlight Inquiry's office was on the third floor of an old brick building near downtown Boston. There was no large sign outside, only a small brass plaque. Evelyn entered wearing a charcoal coat, her hair tied neatly back, her face without makeup. She did not want to look like a woman collapsing, but she no longer had the strength to look like the polished Mrs. Whitmore at dinner parties either. Vivian Cross was in her 50s, with short silver hair and a dark blue suit. She had the eyes of someone who had heard many private stories, but had never turned them into something to enjoy. Her office was neat, without show. A wooden desk, 2 chairs facing each other, a locked filing cabinet, and a small plant by the window. "Please sit," Vivian said. Evelyn sat down. Both hands rested on her handbag. Inside were a photo of the brooch, screenshots of the calls, and the notes she had written herself after the night Adrian came home. Those things were not the whole truth yet, but they were the first pieces. Vivian opened her notebook. "What do you want to verify first?" Evelyn inhaled. "My husband, Adrian Whitmore, often goes to Charleston. He says it is work related to art investment and heritage projects. But I have just learned that he has a separate phone. Through that phone, I heard a little girl call him Daddy. He admitted her name is Sophie. Her mother is Mara Bennett." Vivian wrote slowly. She did not interrupt. She did not overreact. "Do you want to investigate the woman?" Evelyn looked up immediately. "I do not want to harm her. I do not want anyone approaching the child. I only need to know how far Adrian has lied to me, where he was when he said he was on business, whether he has been using shared assets or family funds to conceal this. And I need the report prepared in a way that can be given to a lawyer if necessary. Vivian nodded. Clear. We will only record activity in public places, travel schedules, locations where he appears voluntarily, and legal information that can be verified. If children appear within the scope of public observation, we will describe only what is necessary. We will not exploit sensitive images, and we will not make contact. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Vivian put down her pen and studied her more carefully. I need to ask this. Are you sure you want to know everything? The truth, when it is only suspicion, can hurt. But when it has time, addresses, actions, and specific images, it often becomes very hard to forget. Evelyn looked out the window. Boston outside was gray and cold. In the glass, she saw her own reflection, a tired woman who had not yet fallen. I have lived for years with the feeling that something was wrong, she said. I think the uncertainty has hurt me more. Vivian did not advise her further. She only nodded. Then we will begin. The first report arrived the next morning. The email was secure with a simple subject line, Initial Observation. Evelyn opened it while sitting alone in the kitchen. The Beacon Hill house was too quiet. No sound of Adrian, no shoes coming down the stairs, no voice asking for coffee. She had once thought the silence after he left would frighten her, but it turned out that what frightened her more was remembering that she had lived in a silence like this for far too long and still called it marriage. The report was written in language that was cold and clear. Adrian left Boston on a morning flight to Charleston. After arriving, he met two people at an art consulting office downtown. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Afterward, he had lunch alone. By mid-afternoon, he took a car to Queen Street and entered a shop called Mara's Pressed Garden. Evelyn stopped at that line, Mara's Pressed Garden. The name sounded so gentle, it almost felt unfair. A garden pressed between paper and glass, a place that kept things past their season of blooming, but not entirely gone. Evelyn looked at the words and thought, perhaps Adrian had always had a place like that. A place preserving the part of his life he did not bring back to Boston. She kept reading. Adrian remained inside the shop for more than an hour. Afterward, he left with a woman in her mid-30s, brown hair, slim build, wearing a cream-colored sweater. The two walked to a nearby cafe. Their manner appeared familiar and calm. No disruptive behavior or inappropriate public contact was observed. Later, they returned to the shop. Adrian left alone by late afternoon. The report did not use words like betrayal, mistress, or secret. That was why it hurt more. The truth did not need decoration. It only had to stand there. The second report arrived that same evening, with a few photographs taken from a distance in public places. Vivian included a note. The images were only for verifying presence, not for public use, not to be shared outside legal purposes. Evelyn opened the folder after a very long while. The first photograph showed Adrian standing in front of the pale blue shop. He was not wearing a suit, only a rolled sleeve shirt, light trousers, his posture relaxed. He looked different from the Adrian in Boston, where every gesture was polished to fit the Whitmore name. The second photograph was Mara. She stood beside Adrian, holding a bundle of dried flowers. Her face turned toward him as if saying something. She did not look victorious, not glamorous, not like the image Evelyn's anger had once tried to create. Mara looked like a real woman, with slightly tired shoulders and eyes that had grown used to waiting. The third photograph made Evelyn put a hand over her mouth. Sophie. The little girl wore a yellow coat, her hair braided to one side, standing between Adrian and Mara in front of an outdoor book stall. Adrian was leaning down to show her a book. Mara stood beside them, smiling softly. The moment was painfully ordinary. Nothing shocking, nothing visibly wrong on the surface, just a child with her parents on a peaceful afternoon. And it was that peace that made Evelyn feel as if she could not breathe. She did not hate Sophie. She could not. The girl was only living in the version of the world the adults had given her. But Evelyn also could not deny the feeling of being erased from that picture. For 7 years, Adrian had had moments like this in Charleston, while in Boston, Evelyn had learned not to ask too much. She closed the laptop. Vivian's words echoed in her mind. The truth, when it has images, becomes harder to forget. Yes, but it also made her stronger. Because now, Evelyn was no longer hurting only because of what Adrian had said. She had seen the life he had hidden. And once she had seen it, she could not continue sitting in the Beacon Hill house, waiting for him to return and explain everything in the way that benefited him. That evening, Adrian sent a message. I know everything is hard, but we need to talk. Evelyn looked at the words on the screen. Before, she might have answered. She might have let him come over. She might have sat and listened for another hour to sentences like, I was scared, I was wrong, I still love you. But in her mind now was the image of the pale blue flower shop, Mara with the bundle of dried flowers, Sophie in the yellow coat. Evelyn did not reply. She stood, took a small travel bag from the closet, and folded a few simple outfits into it. Then she booked the earliest flight to Charleston. Not for a loud confrontation, not to hurt anyone. She was going because some truths needed to be seen directly, with her own eyes, before anyone else had time to rewrite them. If Adrian had another world, Evelyn would no longer look at it through reports. She would step into it, calm, clear, and without asking permission. The next morning, Evelyn left Boston while the sky was still pale gray. The small travel bag rested by her feet in the airplane cabin. So light, it hardly seemed like the luggage of a woman preparing to step into the secret part of her husband's life. She did not bring beautiful dresses. She did not bring jewelry. She did not bring anything that belonged to the image of Mrs. Whitmore that other people were used to seeing. She carried only her phone, her identification, a few simple clothes, and a calm that had been sharpened through too many sleepless nights. Outside the small window, clouds drifted in layers of white and gray. Evelyn looked down without truly seeing anything. In her mind was the pale blue front of the flower shop in Vivian's photograph. The woman named Mara standing beside Adrian. Sophie in her yellow coat looking at a book outdoors. She had imagined Mara throughout the flight. In the first wave of pain, Mara had appeared in Evelyn's mind as an easy figure to hate. A woman who knew Adrian had a wife and still kept him in her life. A part of the secret. Half of the betrayal. But the closer Evelyn came to Charleston, the less certain that image became. Because in the photographs, Mara did not look like someone who had won. She looked like someone who had grown used to living with something incomplete. The plane landed in warm sunlight. The air in Charleston was so different from Boston that Evelyn felt as if she had stepped into another chapter of Adrian's life. This city was softer, more humid, more colorful. Low porches, wooden shutters, flowers climbing over balconies, the smell of coffee and sea salt in the wind. Evelyn's Boston was cold stone, clean glass, and polite rooms. Adrian's Charleston was golden sunlight, narrow streets, and secrets that could take root behind small doors. The taxi took her close to Queen Street. Evelyn got out one corner early and walked the rest of the way herself. She needed a few minutes to breathe. She needed her feet to feel this ground before stepping into the place Adrian had been visiting for years. Then she saw it. Mara's pressed garden. The small shop sat between an old bookstore and a craft store. Its front was painted pale blue, a wooden sign hanging slightly crooked, the lettering soft like handwriting. Behind the glass, pressed flower frames hung in small clusters. Pale purple petals, cream yellow, milky white, all lying still between two panes of glass. Beautiful and sad-like moments that had passed their season but still refused to disappear. Evelyn stood before the door. She reminded herself that she'd not come here to make noise, not to frighten a child, not to turn her pain into a scene. She'd come to see clearly the real person behind the name Mara Bennett. She pushed the door open. A small bell rang. Inside, the space was warm and gentle. The scent of dried flowers, paper, old wood, and lavender drifted through the air. Light slipped through thin curtains, falling over tables covered with petals, pressed leaves, glass frames, small tweezers, scissors, and thick ivory paper. At the far end of the room, a woman was bent over, arranging petals one by one inside a frame. Mara Bennett looked up. She was not beautiful in the kind of way that made people turn their heads at once. Her beauty was quieter. Brown hair tied low, a face without elaborate makeup, deep, tired hazel eyes. A few crumbs of dried leaves still clung to her hands. On her wrist was a small scratch, like a trace of the handmade work she did every day. "Hello," Mara said. "Are you looking for a particular flower design?" Evelyn did not answer right away. She looked at the woman, and the anger inside her seemed to lose part of its shape. It did not disappear. It simply became less easy to throw at the person standing in front of her. "I am Evelyn Harper." The room seemed to pause. Mara did not cry out. She did not step back. She did not pretend not to understand. She only placed the tweezers on the table very slowly, then removed her apron. Her eyes changed. The politeness of a shopkeeper gave way to a tired caution. "I know who you are," Mara said. The sentence passed through Evelyn like a cold wind. She had guessed it, but hearing it directly still hurt. For years, Evelyn had been the one who did not know. And here, in this small flower shop, her name had existed for a long time. "I assumed so," Evelyn replied. Mara looked toward the back door, as if checking something. "Sophie's not here. She is at school." Evelyn gave a small nod. "Good. I do not want her present for this conversation." Something softened very slightly on Mara's face. Not enough to be called trust, but enough for the first wall to lower a little. "What do you want?" Mara asked. Evelyn looked around the shop. In one small corner was a children's drawing table, a box of colored pencils, a few sheets of paper held down by a wooden bird-shaped weight. On the wall nearby hung a child's drawing, 3 people standing together beneath the sun. A tall man, a brown-haired woman, a little girl in a yellow dress. Underneath, in slightly uneven letters, were the words, "My family." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "I want to understand the truth," she said. "Not Adrian's version, not the version his family once kept quiet. The truth." Mara looked at her longer. Then she pulled 2 chairs beside the work table. "Sit down." Evelyn sat. Mara sat opposite her, but not too close. Between them was a tabletop covered in dried flowers, fragile petals pressed flat to preserve their color. Evelyn suddenly thought that perhaps both she and Mara were like those petals, still holding their shape but pressed under pressure for too long. Mara spoke first. "Adrian and I knew each other before he married you. Long before that, we met when he came to Charleston to work on a community arts project. He was different then, less polished, less like someone always carrying the Whitmore name on his shoulders." She stopped and looked down at her hands. "I'm not telling you this so you will pity me." "I did not come here to pity you," Evelyn said. "I came because I do not want to be blind anymore." Mara nodded. "I was pregnant before your wedding. I told him, I wrote to him, I called him. He knew." Evelyn had already known that from Adrian, but hearing Mara say it still tightened her chest. "What did he say?" Mara gave a soft laugh, without joy. That everything was too complicated. That his family had made plans. That if the truth came out, many people would be hurt. He said he needed time. Adrian always needs time. But his time is often just a way of making other people wait. Evelyn said nothing. She saw herself in that sentence, waiting for a call, waiting for an explanation, waiting for a marriage to return to normal when perhaps it had never been as normal as she believed. Then Sophie was born. Mara continued. "He came back. Not consistently at first, but he came back. He held her, cried, said he could not disappear from her life. I believed him, or I wanted to believe him. When you have a child in your arms, you hold on to anything that looks like hope." Evelyn looked at the drawing on the wall. "Do you still love him?" Mara was silent for a long time. I used to. Now, not in that way anymore. Now Adrian is Sophie's father. He is the person who sometimes makes her happy and sometimes makes her wait. I have learned not to build my life around whether he comes or not, but Sophie has not learned that yet, and maybe she should not have to learn it so early. That sentence touched Evelyn more deeply than a confession of love would have. It was not romantic, not dramatic. It was the real exhaustion of a mother. I thought you had the truer part of him, Evelyn said. Mara looked up. I used to think you had the safer part. The beautiful house. The clear title. His family's acceptance. The photographs where everyone knew you were his wife. Evelyn smiled very faintly, more sad than bitter. Maybe we both only had a part, and every part was missing the truth. Mara looked at her. For the first time, her gaze was no longer only cautious. There was recognition in it. Two women sitting across from each other, not like an enemy and a winner, but like two people placed inside a game whose rules no one had explained. I did not want to hurt you, Mara said quietly, but I also did not know how to do the right thing. When Sophie was little, I only thought about raising my child, keeping the shop, letting her know her father. I told myself that Adrian's life with you was another part of his life, a place I had no right to enter. Evelyn looked at Mara's hands, fingers that worked with flowers, delicate but marked with small calluses. I also told myself Charleston was part of his work, a place I should not question. Both of them fell silent. From upstairs, a small sound of something falling echoed down, perhaps from the apartment above the shop. Mara immediately lifted her head. The reflex of a mother. Evelyn saw it and felt her heart soften in a way she had not wanted. Sophie will be out of school soon, Mara said. I do not want her to meet you today. Not because you have done anything wrong. She's just already confused enough. I understand, Evelyn answered at once. Mara seemed surprised by how quickly she said it. Evelyn stood. She looked again at the drawing on the wall, at the three figures under the yellow sun. A simple picture, but it held the whole longing of a child who wanted her world to be whole. Before she reached the door, she turned back. Mara! The other woman looked at her. I do not know what I'm going to do next, but I will not do anything that places Sophie in the middle of adult anger. Mara swallowed. Her eyes grew slightly wet, but she did not let the tears fall. Thank you. Evelyn stepped outside. Charleston was still filled with sunlight. The streets were still warm, people still laughed, drank coffee, bought flowers, lived lives that had nothing to do with the fractures behind the pale blue door. Evelyn walked slowly along the sidewalk. She had come here to see the woman inside Adrian's secret, but she left carrying something heavier. Mara was not the shadow that had stolen her life. Sophie was not a mistake. And Adrian, the man who had divided his life in two to spare himself from a difficult choice, was the one who had left two women and one child living in rooms without enough light. For the first time, Evelyn was not only hurting for herself, she was hurting for everyone who had been forced to live around Adrian's silence. That feeling followed her throughout the flight back to Boston. It was not loud like the first wave of anger, and it was not cold like the moment she had watched Adrian stand in the living room and admit Sophie was his daughter. It was heavier, more complicated. Because now, the truth was no longer a simple straight line between the person who betrayed and the person who had been betrayed. It had opened into a web of wrong choices, fears hidden beneath polite words, and women placed in separate rooms so no one could see the whole house burning. When the taxi stopped in front of the Beacon Hill house, Boston had already fallen into night. The stone steps felt cold beneath her feet. The house stood there, elegant and silent, as if it had never contained a conversation capable of changing a woman forever. Evelyn unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of old wood and white flowers was still there, but one thing had disappeared: illusion. She locked the door, set down her bag, and went straight into the living room. On the table, the small box holding the pearl brooch still sat where she had left it. Evelyn looked at it for a moment, then turned away. Tonight, she did not need another symbol. She needed quiet. But the next morning, the quiet was broken. The doorbell rang at 10 o'clock. One long, even ring, not hurried, but full of ownership. Evelyn was standing in the kitchen with a cup of hot tea. She set the cup down. Before she could step out, the bell rang again. When she opened the door, she saw Daniel Harper, her older brother. He stood on the step, his dark coat still touched by a light rain, his face tense. Daniel had always been the calm one. He was a lawyer, used to speaking slowly, thinking carefully, rarely allowing emotion to outrun language. But today, his anger was clear in his eyes. "Evelyn," he said. Only one word. Then he embraced her. That embrace nearly broke her open. Not because she was weak, but because after days of standing upright among truths too sharp to hold, she finally touched someone who did not demand that she explain why she hurt. "Why didn't you call me?" Daniel asked when he let her go. "I had to hear this from someone I know on the Arts Council." Then Mom called, sounding like she was about to get on the next plane. Evelyn tried to smile. "I did not know where to begin." "Then begin by telling me what that man did." The moment he finished speaking, a black car stopped at the curb. Daniel turned his head. The muscles in his face hardened at once. Beatrice Whitmore stepped out of the car. She needed no introduction. Everything about Beatrice was a statement. A perfectly fitted cream coat, silver hair pinned low, thin leather gloves, an expensive little bag resting on her wrist. She walked up the steps as if this house still belonged to the system she controlled. "Evelyn," she said, "I think we need to talk." Daniel positioned himself half in front of his sister. "You should have called first." Beatrice looked at him with politeness so sharp it felt cold. "Daniel, I did not know you were here." "Now you do," Daniel replied. Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. She felt the protection in Daniel's posture, but she did not want to stand behind anyone anymore. Not behind Adrian, not behind the Whitmore family, not even behind her brother. "Come in," she said. Beatrice entered the living room. Her eyes moved around the space, noting every small detail. The blanket lying crooked on the chair, the book not yet put away, the teacup still on the table. Her gaze passed over everything like a manager inspecting damage after an unwelcome event. "The house looks tired," she said. Daniel gave a short laugh. "The house is not the problem." Beatrice sat in the chair Adrian usually used. The action was not accidental. She always knew how to choose the most advantageous position. Evelyn sat opposite her. Daniel stood beside Evelyn for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat down, still angled slightly toward his sister. Beatrice removed her gloves and placed them on her lap. "Adrian is at my house. He has barely slept. He is very upset, Evelyn, very remorseful." Evelyn looked at her. "I believe he is upset, but being upset does not make the truth disappear." A flicker of irritation crossed Beatrice's face. "No one is saying the truth does not matter. But how the truth is handled is what determines whether a family can survive a crisis." Daniel asked directly. "How long have you known about this?" Beatrice turned to him. "This is a family matter. I am Evelyn's family." The sentence was short, firm, and did not need a raised voice. Beatrice fell silent for a moment, then shifted her gaze back to Evelyn. "I knew Adrian once had an old connection in Charleston. Before he married you, his father and I believed that matter had ended." Evelyn heard every word. Old connection, that matter, had ended. Polished phrases designed so no one had to look directly at the real person behind them. "And Sophie?" she asked. Beatrice tightened her gloves slightly. "When the child was born, Adrian said he wanted to provide support. This family does not turn its back on responsibility. I believed everything had been arranged properly." "Arranged properly?" Evelyn repeated. "A child whose father travels between two cities, a mother living with incomplete answers, a wife entering a marriage without being told the truth. That is properly arranged." Beatrice sighed. "Evelyn, You are speaking from emotion. I understand. You are hurt. But if you were calmer, you would see that a long marriage cannot be decided by one shock. Evelyn looked at her for a long time. No, it is not being decided by one shock. It is being decided by 7 years without honesty. Daniel placed a hand on the arm of his chair. He did not interrupt, but his presence stood behind Evelyn like a wall. For the first time, Beatrice realized that the daughter-in-law before her was no longer standing alone in the way she once had. Her voice changed. Softer. Slower. You have your place, Evelyn. You are Adrian's wife. You have this house, this future, a life many women dream of. What happened in Charleston is unfortunate, but it can be managed with discretion. Adrian can continue to support Sophie more clearly. Mara will be respected within an appropriate boundary, and you and Adrian can rebuild. Evelyn heard the sentence as neatly as a plan. Everyone placed into the correct box. Sophie as responsibility, Mara as appropriate boundary, Evelyn as the wife who should remain, Adrian as the center to be saved from the consequences of his own choices. And how will Adrian be responsible? She asked. Beatrice's brow tightened slightly. He has admitted his mistake. Admitting it after being found out is not the same as telling the truth on his own. No one is perfect, Evelyn. That sentence might once have silenced her, because Evelyn had once feared she was too harsh, too sensitive, too lacking in forgiveness. But after seeing Mara's flower shop, after hearing Sophie's voice from upstairs asking whether her father had called, she knew forgiveness could not be demanded from someone who had been kept outside the truth. She said, I do not need a perfect husband. I need a husband who does not turn my life into part of a cover-up. The air in the room froze. Beatrice looked at her, and for the first time, the politeness on her face grew thin. Beneath it was steel. What are you planning to do? Evelyn answered. I have not told you because I am not obligated to. But I will work with a lawyer, I will protect my interests, and I will not allow this to be wrapped in words like family, honor, or discretion. Beatrice fell silent. Then she spoke slowly. You should think about the consequences. Divorce is not only a matter of emotion. It affects property, reputation, social relationships, even your Harper family. Daniel leaned forward. You do not need to worry about the Harper family. We do not trade Evelyn's peace for a few seats at dinner parties. Beatrice turned to him. Very noble. But real life does not run on beautiful sentences. Unexpectedly, Evelyn found herself calmer than both of them. She understood Beatrice's tactic. If she could not soften Evelyn with Adrian's remorse, she would frighten her with the future, reputation, family, age, loneliness. Words women are often taught to fear, but Evelyn had been afraid long enough. She stood, walked to the small table, and picked up a thin folder. There is one more thing, she said. I want my lawyer to review the support payments from Whitmore Foundation to certain programs in Charleston, including Mara's Pressed Garden. I am not drawing conclusions too quickly, but I want everything clear. Beatrice's expression changed very slightly. Only for a moment. But Evelyn saw it. Daniel saw it too. Beatrice said, those support payments are entirely legal. I hope so, Evelyn replied. Because if everything is legal, no one should be afraid of clarity. That sentence left the room silent for a long time. Beatrice stood. This time, she no longer tried to sound gentle. She put her gloves back on, took her bag, and looked at Evelyn like a woman who had just stepped out of the place arranged for her. You are making everything harder than necessary. Evelyn stood too. No, I am stopping myself from making everything easier for the people who hurt me. Daniel looked at his sister, quiet pride in his eyes. Beatrice walked to the door. Before leaving, she stopped. Adrian still loves you. Evelyn looked at her. Maybe. But I cannot keep living inside a love that needs too many secrets to survive. Beatrice did not answer. She stepped outside, the door closed. In the living room, silence returned, but it no longer felt the same. It was not the silence of fear. It was the pause after a woman had refused to let an entire distinguished family define her pain for her. Daniel stood and wrapped his arms around her. You did well. This time, Evelyn's tears fell, not violently, just quietly. Daniel did not tell her not to cry. He only stood there, letting her be weak inside an embrace that asked nothing from her. After a while, Evelyn wiped her face. I need to find more proof, she said. Daniel looked at her. About the foundation, about everything. Adrian, Mara, Sophie, what they knew, what they hid. I do not want to fight to shame anyone. I just want no one to ever be able to say, I imagined this. Daniel nodded. Then we do it the right way. Evelyn looked up the stairs toward Adrian's study. The door at the end of the hallway was still closed. Before, she had thought of it as her husband's private space. Now, it looked like a room that might hold answers to the years she had spent doubting herself. She inhaled deeply. No, she said. The first thing is that I will go in there myself. Because there are some doors in a woman's life that only she has the right to open. Evelyn stood at the foot of the stairs, her eyes fixed on the hallway above. Adrian's study was at the end of the corridor, closed, silent, as if it had always been there to remind her that inside this house, there were still territories she had never truly been allowed to enter. No one had ever forbidden her. Adrian had never said that room was a place she could not touch. He had simply created a softer boundary, more polite, harder to challenge. He called it a space for concentration, called it work documents, called it boring things she would not be interested in. For years, Evelyn had believed him. Or more precisely, she had taught herself that trust meant not opening doors that made other people uncomfortable. Now she understood. A marriage could not survive on rooms locked by courtesy. Daniel stood a few steps behind her. I will be downstairs, he said. If you need anything, call me. Evelyn nodded. She knew he wanted to go with her. She knew his protective instinct made it difficult for him to let her step into that room alone. But Daniel did not stop her. He understood this was not only about finding documents. This was the first time Evelyn was entering the part of life Adrian had kept private, without permission, without fear of being called suspicious, without fear of being judged as not refined enough. She went up the stairs. Each wooden step made a very small sound. That sound carried memories of nights when she had stood outside the study door, listening to Adrian speak on the phone in a lowered voice. When she asked, he would say it was a difficult client, a schedule issue, a project in Charleston. She had once stood there with a cup of tea in her hand, convincing herself that calls behind a closed door were normal for a busy man. Now, every version of normal needed to be examined again. Evelyn pushed the door open. Adrian's study was clean to the point of almost feeling emotionless. A large wooden desk stood by the window. On it were only a lamp, a pen holder, and several neatly stacked folders. Bookshelves covered the walls, filled with books about art, investment, heritage preservation, and private collections. In the corner sat a dark brown leather chair, where Adrian often sat during long phone calls. This room had once made her think of intelligence, stability, a man whose life was clearly organized. Now it made her think of a stage that had been cleaned too carefully. She began with the desk drawers, contracts, invitations, meeting minutes, foundation documents. Everything was in place, labeled, ordered. That neatness had once been something she admired in Adrian. Now it looked like proof that he knew how to arrange everything, including the things that should never have been arranged. In the second drawer, she found a file titled Charleston Community Support. Her hand stopped. She opened it. Inside were copies of grants from the Whitmore Foundation to small arts programs in Charleston. A few unfamiliar names. A few community centers. And then one line made Evelyn unable to blink. Mara's Pressed Garden. The description of the support sounded beautiful. Pressed flower art classes for children, material costs, after-school creative programs. Every word was clean, humane, almost impossible to question if the reader did not know that behind that name was a child named Sophie and a man who always said he was traveling for work. Evelyn did not rush to conclusions. She did not want to turn pain into accusations without a foundation. But she was no longer naive enough to treat coincidence as harmless. She photographed every page, every line, every signature. Adrian had signed several sections. Beatrice appeared in the board approval section. Adrian was not the only one who had walked through this door. She set the file aside and kept searching. The main filing cabinet was locked. The key was in a small box under the pen drawer, so easy to find that it made Evelyn realize just how confident Adrian had been. He had not thought she would look. Not because he had hidden things too well, but because he had believed she would not dare to open them. She opened the cabinet. Most of it was financial paperwork, schedules, consulting contracts. Nothing obvious. No love letter lying in plain sight, no notebook of guilt. The truth rarely appears in the dramatic way people imagine. It often sits between ordinary descriptions, inside a payment with a beautiful name, inside a trip recorded as work with a partner. Evelyn straightened and let her eyes move over the bookshelf, and then she saw the box. It sat on the highest shelf, pushed deep behind a thick row of books. A brown cardboard box, old, unlabeled, with no archive code, a thin layer of dust along its edge. In this room that was too perfect, its ordinariness made it feel out of place. She pulled a small chair close to the shelf, stepped up, and reached for the box. Dust clung to her hands. The box was lighter than she expected, but when she placed it on the desk, Evelyn felt as though she had just set down the entire weight of 7 years of marriage. She opened the lid. Inside were letters, photographs, several envelopes, an old medical file, and a bundle of papers tied with a pale ribbon. The room became so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She took out the first envelope. The postmark was from Charleston. The date was a few weeks before her wedding to Adrian. The handwriting was soft, slightly slanted. Adrian, I do not know how to begin. I went to the doctor. I am pregnant. I'm not writing to force you to do something you do not want, but you need to know the truth before stepping into a new life. This child exists. I exist too. You have the right to choose, but I need you to choose like an adult. Evelyn stopped. There were no violent words in the letter, no threats, no cheap drama, only a woman trying to tell the truth to a man who was preparing to marry someone else. It was that calmness that hurt Evelyn. She kept reading. If you want to be present in the child's life, say it clearly. If you cannot, say that clearly too. What I cannot accept is waiting in silence while everything becomes a secret convenient for you. Below was the signature, Mara. Evelyn placed the letter on the desk. She did not cry. Tears seemed to be standing very far away, on the other side of a cold wall. In front of her was no longer the story Adrian had told with words like complicated, afraid, and I did not know what to do. In front of her was proof that he had been given a chance to tell the truth before marrying her, and he had not. She took the photographs from another envelope, Sophie as a tiny baby, wrapped in a light-colored blanket. Sophie learning to walk in a sun-filled room. Sophie beside a birthday cake, round-cheeked, bright-eyed. Sophie on her first day of school, wearing a yellow backpack. In some of the photos, Adrian was beside her. He was bending down to tie her shoes, holding her in his arms, standing behind her in a park. Evelyn looked for a long time. She did not want to use those photographs as weapons. Each picture held a real child, a child who had not chosen the circumstances she was born into. Evelyn carefully placed them down, face down, as if keeping Sophie from becoming cold evidence inside her heart. Then she saw the medical file. Her name was on the cover, Evelyn Harper Whitmore. Her hand froze. These were the documents from the pregnancy loss years ago. Dry medical language, cautious conclusions, recommendations for physical and emotional follow-up. She read very slowly. No sentence stated one simple cause with certainty. No line accused anyone. There was only one note that made her stop breathing. Prolonged stress may be a factor that should be considered during recovery and future health care. Recommended psychological support, stable rest, and a safe family environment. May. That word mattered. Evelyn knew she could not and should not turn pain into an absolute conclusion, but she also could not read that line without remembering the months she had lived in worry, loneliness, and a marriage full of empty spaces. Adrian had been absent too often. His phone had been off too often. She had blamed herself too often. And he, somewhere between Boston and Charleston, had known a truth she had not been allowed to know. She set the file down. At that moment, her phone rang. Adrian. His name appeared on the screen. Evelyn looked at the box. Mara's letter, Sophie's photographs, foundation documents, her medical file. Everything lay before her, not loud, not screaming, but enough to ensure the room would never feel the same again. She did not answer. A message arrived. I know you are angry. We need to talk. Evelyn picked up the phone. Her fingers were cold but steady. I found the box. The letter before the wedding. Sophie's photographs. Documents related to the foundation, my health records. From now on, everything will be handled carefully and through lawyers. Please do not come to the house without notice. She pressed send. The phone was silent for a few seconds. Then Adrian called again. Evelyn ended the call, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she was no longer letting his panic decide the rhythm of her breathing. Downstairs, Daniel called up. Evelyn, are you okay? She looked at the papers on the desk, then out the window. Boston outside was still gray and cold, but daylight made everything clearer. No, she thought, I am not okay yet. But she had the truth. She gathered the documents, sorted them carefully, made copies, and placed Sophie's photographs in a separate envelope without any cruel or bitter note attached. That child was not evidence meant to hurt anyone. She was the reason every adult in the story needed to behave with more decency. When Evelyn came down the stairs with the folder in her hand, Daniel stood immediately. What did you find? He asked. Evelyn looked at him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were no longer lost. Enough that no one can call my pain imaginary anymore. Daniel did not ask further. He only reached out his hand. Evelyn tightened her grip on the folder and did not hand it to him. He understood and lowered his hand. From that moment on, the box on the high shelf was no longer the place where Adrian kept the pieces of life he wanted to hide. It became the beginning of the life Evelyn would protect for herself, with truth, with clarity, and with the right to step out of a story that would no longer be written for her by anyone else. But before lawyers, documents, and official exchanges began, Evelyn knew there was still one person who needed to hear the truth from her directly. Not Adrian. He had been given too many years to tell the truth. He had been given too many chances to stop before everything became impossible to repair. Every flight to Charleston, every time he watched Sophie grow, every time he returned to Boston and placed a calm kiss on Evelyn's forehead, each one had been a chance. And he had chosen silence. The person Evelyn needed to meet was Mara Bennett. All night after finding the box, Evelyn sat in the dining room with the folder of documents in front of her. Daniel stayed downstairs in the living room, occasionally coming in to check on her, but never pushing. He understood that some pain could not be comforted too early. It needed to be faced. It needed to be named. It needed to be placed on the table under the light. Inside the folder was a copy of the letter Mara had sent Adrian before the wedding. Several notes about the support payments from the Whitmore Foundation, photographs of the necessary documents, and papers related to the marriage. Evelyn did not bring Sophie's photographs in a way that would turn the child into cold evidence. She placed those pictures separately in another envelope, only to remind herself that every decision from this point forward had to keep a child as far away from harm as possible. Near dawn, she booked a flight back to Charleston. Daniel looked at her when he entered the kitchen. Are you sure? Evelyn poured tea but did not drink it. I am sure. I'm not going there to confront her. I am going there to talk. With Mara? Yes. Daniel sat across from her. His face grew serious. What if she does not want to listen? then I will respect that. But I need to tell her at least once that I know the truth. Not through Adrian, not through the Whitmore family, through me. Daniel was silent for a moment, then nodded. Call me when you arrive. Evelyn agreed. The flight to Charleston this time no longer felt like flying into a blind storm the way it had before. It felt like returning to the scene of a fracture, not to deepen it, but to see whether someone else was standing on the other side of it too. When the plane landed, Charleston's sunlight spread a soft gold across the window. Evelyn pulled her coat closer and stepped out, feeling strangely calm inside. She was no longer searching for an enemy. She was searching for a woman who had also been placed in silence for far too long. Mara's pressed garden was open when Evelyn arrived. The pale blue storefront was still as gentle as before. The pressed flower frames hanging behind the glass still looked beautiful, fragile, and quiet. Evelyn stood before the door for a few seconds, took a deep breath, then pushed it open. A small bell rang. Mara was standing behind the table, arranging white petals inside a frame. She looked up. When she saw Evelyn, her hand stopped. This time, there was no clear surprise on Mara's face, only a tiredness, like someone who had known this meeting would eventually return. You came back, Mara said. Evelyn closed the door behind her. I need to talk to you. If now is not convenient, I can wait. Mara looked toward the narrow staircase leading upstairs. Sophie is at school. We have time. She turned the sign on the door to temporarily closed. The action was very small, but it changed the space inside the shop. Outside, people still passed by. Sunlight still fell. Cars and footsteps still moved along the street. But inside, there were only two women, a table covered in dried flowers, and a truth that could no longer be pushed away. Evelyn placed the folder on the table. I found a box in Adrian's study. Mara did not touch the documents, but her face went pale. Your letter was inside it, Evelyn said. The letter you sent before the wedding. Mara closed her eyes. I thought he had thrown it away. No, he kept it. Mara let out a very soft laugh, without joy. Adrian always keeps things that make him feel deeper than he is, even when he is not brave enough to live up to them. Evelyn looked at her. That did not sound like the words of a woman still dreaming. It sounded like the words of someone who had passed through hope, disappointment, waiting, and had finally learned how to call things by their proper names. I read the letter many times, Evelyn said. You gave him the chance to choose clearly. Mara lowered her gaze and gently touched a petal on the table. I thought that if people knew the truth, they would do the right thing. I was younger then, and probably more naive. She looked up. He did not choose. That was Adrian's real choice. He let everything exist halfway. I was in Charleston, you were in Boston, Sophie was between promises, and he moved back and forth as if, as long as no one stood in the same room, everything could continue. Evelyn sat down in the chair by the table. Mara sat opposite her. Between them, the sharp tension of their first meeting was no longer there. There was still pain, still caution, but something else had joined it. Recognition. I used to think you had the real part of him, Evelyn said. Mara shook her head. I used to think you had the official part, the acknowledged part. I envied that for years. Not always clearly, but I did. When I saw photos of the two of you at events, when I saw your name beside his, I wondered why Sophie and I only got to exist inside the pockets of time he could arrange. Evelyn lowered her eyes. I envied what I saw in the report too. The way he stood in front of your shop, the way he smiled with Sophie. I realized there were ordinary moments I had never been allowed to see. Mara looked at her more gently. Maybe both of us saw what the other had, and mistook it for the whole thing. The sentence stayed between them. Evelyn opened the folder and took out copies of the support payments. There's also this. Whitmore Foundation transferred money to several programs in Charleston, including your shop. Mara looked at the papers and exhaled slowly. I did receive funding for children's pressed flower classes. Part of that money helped me keep the classes going, and at certain times, helped me stabilize life for Sophie. Adrian said it was the cleanest way. There were documents, there was an official purpose. I wanted to believe that made it clean enough. Evelyn did not speak right away. She listened carefully, because she understood how a mother's desperation could blur many lines. Mara was not boasting. She was not defending herself by throwing blame elsewhere. She was speaking like someone looking back at her own choices under a new light. I did not come here to use this against you, Evelyn said. I only want everything clear from now on. If Beatrice or Adrian use money to control the story, both you and I will be placed into the roles they want for us. I become the overly emotional wife. You become the woman who receives benefits. Sophie becomes the reason they say everything must be kept quiet. Mara looked up quickly. No, I will not let Sophie be used like that. Neither will I. Two short sentences, but they formed the first bridge between them. Mara stood and walked to the window. Outside, a woman walked past with a dog, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. Ordinary life continued, careless in the face of what was being decided inside the small flower shop. What do you want from me? Mara asked. Evelyn inhaled. I want us to stop letting Adrian decide who gets to know what. I am going to divorce him. That is my decision. But I do not want him to leave Boston as a man who lost his wife and return to Charleston as if you and Sophie are his natural refuge. You deserve the right to choose too. Sophie deserves a father who is clear and steady, not someone who comes and goes according to his guilt. Mara turned back. You are saying we should talk to him together. Yes, to force him to choose someone. No. Evelyn shook her head at once. Not to choose one woman as a prize. None of us is a prize for his late remorse. He has to choose how to live responsibly. With me, that means a respectful and transparent divorce process. With you and Sophie, it means a clear parenting schedule, legal support, and boundaries that will not leave her waiting in uncertainty. Mara was silent for a long time. I am afraid Sophie will be hurt, she said. Evelyn looked at her. So am I. She is not your child. No, but she is the most innocent person in this, and I do not want my pain to hurt her further. Mara looked at Evelyn as if truly seeing her for the first time. Not the wife in Boston, not the symbol of the life Adrian had chosen to make public, but a woman who had lost so much and still had enough clarity not to pour her wounds onto a child. Mara sat down again. All right, she said. We will talk to him. But not in front of Sophie. Of course. And we will not turn this into a scene. Evelyn nodded. Only the truth, boundaries, and what needs to happen next. At that moment, Mara's phone lit up. A message from the person picking Sophie up from school saying class had ended early. Mara read it and her face tightened. Sophie will be home soon. Evelyn stood immediately. I will go. Mara looked at her, then at the folder on the table. No, stay one more minute. We need to decide now. Tonight I will call Adrian. I will tell him to come to Charleston. Will you be here? Evelyn did not hesitate. Yes? Mara nodded. Fear was still in her eyes, but behind the fear, a decision had taken shape. Then tonight, we will not wait for him to choose how the story is told anymore. Evelyn looked at the woman before her. They were not friends. It might be a long time before that word could be used. But in that moment, they were no longer standing on opposite sides of the lie. They were standing on the same side as the truth. And above all, on the same side as a child who needed the adults to finally behave like adults. The sentence was never spoken, but both Evelyn and Mara felt it in the silence between them. The air inside the flower shop seemed to grow heavier. Not because of hatred, but because of responsibility. Before this, each of them had been placed in a separate corner of the story. Evelyn in Boston, with the beautiful house and the clear title. Mara in Charleston, with the blue flower shop and a child who always looked toward the door whenever she heard familiar footsteps. And Adrian stood between the two places, using silence to keep everything from colliding. Tonight, everything would collide. Mara looked at the clock on the wall. Sophie would be home in just a few minutes. She put the documents into a locked drawer, leaving only a blank sheet of paper, a pen, and 2 glasses of water on the table. Evelyn noticed the gesture, not because Mara wanted to hide the truth forever, but because she understood that a child should not have to see every broken piece at once. When Sophie was brought home by the neighbor, Mara went to the back door to meet her daughter. Evelyn stepped farther inside, trying to keep an unexpected meeting from becoming uncomfortable. But Sophie still saw her through the gap in the door. The little girl paused for a moment, her brown eyes widening, then gave a small wave. "Hi, Miss Evelyn." Evelyn felt her heart soften. "Hi, Sophie." Mara placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Go upstairs, change your clothes, have a snack, and do some drawing, sweetheart. Tonight, Mommy needs to talk to Daddy about something." Sophie looked at her mother, then at Evelyn. Children sometimes understand the air faster than adults believe. The girl did not ask many questions. She only nodded. "Did Daddy make you sad again?" Mara froze. Evelyn fell silent too. No one wanted to lie, but no one wanted to place more weight on a child either. Mara knelt in front of her daughter. "Daddy and Mommy need to talk about some grown-up things. But you did not do anything wrong. And no matter how the grown-ups talk, you are safe and you are loved. Can you remember that?" Sophie looked at her mother for a while, then nodded. "I remember." The little girl went up the stairs, but before she disappeared completely, she turned back to look at Evelyn. "Are you going to be here?" Evelyn answered softly. "Only for a little while." Sophie asked nothing more. Her small footsteps faded upstairs. Mara stood still for a few seconds after her daughter vanished, as if she needed to gather the strength that Sophie's eyes had shaken loose. Then she took out her phone. "I will call Adrian," she said. Evelyn nodded. Mara dialed the number, turned on speaker, and placed the phone on the table. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. Adrian answered. "Mara, is something wrong? Is Sophie okay?" Even over the phone, his voice tightened when he mentioned his daughter. Evelyn heard it and felt a deeper sadness. Adrian was not a man without feeling. The problem was that his feeling always arrived after avoidance, always had to push through the layers of secrecy he had built himself. "Sophie is fine," Mara said, "but you need to come to the shop tonight." A pause. "Tonight. I'm in Boston. I can video call. Whatever it is, we can talk now." Evelyn stepped closer to the table. "No, this needs to be said in person." The other end of the line went silent. "Evelyn." Adrian's voice changed completely. Startled first, then cautious. "You are there." "Yes," Evelyn said. "I am here with Mara." Another silence. Longer this time. Evelyn could almost picture Adrian standing frozen somewhere in a luxurious room, the phone pressed to his ear, understanding for the first time that the 2 worlds he had once kept separate were no longer separate at all. Mara continued, calmer than Evelyn had expected. "Adrian, we're not calling you here to argue or create a scene. Sophie is upstairs, and she will not be part of this conversation. But you need to be present. Tonight, we are going to talk about boundaries, responsibility, and how everything will be handled from now on." Adrian exhaled. "Mara, I know everything is a mess. I'm trying to handle it." "You had many years to handle it," Evelyn said. "Tonight is not for hearing more promises. Tonight is for everyone to put the truth on the table." Adrian was silent. Then he asked, "What do both of you want from me?" Mara looked at Evelyn. There was exhaustion in her eyes, but no wavering left. "We want you to come. If you cannot come tonight, all communication will move to lawyers starting tomorrow. Sophie's visitation schedule, financial support, matters related to the foundation, everything will be clarified in writing. No more vague private arrangements," Evelyn added, "and my divorce process will begin. Not through your mother, not through private calls meant to persuade me. Everything needs to be transparent and respectful." Adrian did not answer right away. At last, he said quietly, "I will come. The earliest flight." I will be there before 9 tonight. Mara ended the call. For a few seconds, no one said anything. The call had ended, but its echo still remained inside the flower shop like a bell ringing behind a closed door. From then until evening, time moved very slowly. Mara took Sophie upstairs for an early dinner, read her a short story, and let the girl draw in the small living room above the shop. Evelyn stayed downstairs, helping Mara rearrange the flower frames, wipe the table, and place the documents in the right order. They did not speak much. Each of them needed to save her strength for the conversation ahead. In the end, only a few necessary things remained on the table. A copy of the letter Mara had once sent Adrian before the wedding, a summary of the foundation support payments that needed to be reviewed by lawyers, Evelyn's notice that she would proceed with divorce, and one sheet of paper Mara had written for Sophie, not to give to the child, but to remind the adults in the room whom they were speaking for. On that paper were very simple things. A stable visitation schedule, no promises if he was not sure he could keep them, no appearing unexpectedly and then disappearing, no allowing Sophie to think she had to be better behaved for her father to stay. All support had to be clear, legal, and not routed through paths that could later allow someone to control Mara and her daughter. Evelyn read those lines and felt her eyes grow hot, not because of drama, but because what a child needed turned out to be painfully simple. Be present. Be on time. Tell the truth in a way she could bear. Love through steady action. Close to 9, rain began to fall softly outside the glass. Small drops pulled thin lines across the shop window. The pale blue sign swayed in the wind. Evelyn stood beside the counter. Mara stood near the table. Both of them went silent when the sound of a car stopping came from the street. Adrian entered a few minutes later. He did not look like the man who had once walked into the Beacon Hill living room with anger and the role of the forgotten husband. He looked exhausted. His dark coat was wet at the shoulders, his hair messy, his face pale. When he saw Evelyn and Mara standing on the same side of the table, he stopped at the door. No one spoke first. It was an image Adrian had never prepared himself to face. The wife he had married, the woman he had once loved. Two women no longer looking at each other through his version of the story. Two women who had spoken for themselves, pieced together the missing parts themselves, stepped out of the places he had put them in. Mara pointed to the chair across from them. "Sit down, Adrian." He sat. Evelyn began. Her voice was not loud, but it was so clear that each word seemed to be placed on the table. "We are not going to debate whether you were wrong. That is already clear. We are going to talk about what needs to happen next so no one continues to be placed inside this uncertainty." Adrian looked at her. "I know I hurt you." Evelyn nodded. "I hear you. But today, the apology is not the center. Action is." Mara pushed her sheet of paper toward him. "These are the things Sophie needs. Not the things I want from you. Not what is convenient for you. What she needs in order to grow up without waiting in fear." Adrian picked up the paper. His hand trembled slightly. He read. The more he read, the heavier his face became. There was nothing on the page that accused him harshly, and because of that, it was harder to avoid. The requests were too reasonable, too kind, too late. Evelyn placed her notice on the table. "I am going to divorce you. I am not saying this to punish you. I am saying it because this marriage no longer has a foundation truthful enough for me to stay. From now on, you will work with my lawyer. If anything concerns property or the foundation, we will let professionals handle it. Your family will not rewrite the story." Adrian lifted his head. "Evelyn, I still love you." That sentence might once have softened her, but not tonight. She looked at him, calm and sad. "Maybe. But love cannot replace the truth. And I no longer want to live inside a love that needs too many secrets to survive." Adrian turned to Mara. "And you?" Mara looked at him for a long time. "I am not the place you run to after losing Boston. And Sophie is not the place where you search for forgiveness. If you want to be a father through schedule, stability, and respect." not through visits guided by emotion. Adrian lowered his head. For the first time in the conversation, he did not try to explain. He did not try to soften the room. He did not try to make himself look pitiful. Perhaps he finally understood that the two women before him no longer needed him to define their pain. Evelyn said, "You have 7 days to decide how you will live from here, not to choose between us. That door has changed now. 7 days to decide how you will take responsibility with Sophie, with the divorce process, and with what you allowed your family to cover in silence." Mara added, "After 7 days, if you are still vague, the lawyers will set every boundary for us." The rain outside fell more steadily. Inside the flower shop, the pressed flowers rested quietly inside their glass frames. Beautiful, but no longer living under the illusion that they were still on the branch. Adrian looked at Evelyn, then at Mara, then at the paper about Sophie in his hand. He spoke very quietly. "I understand." No one knew whether he truly understood yet. But at least this time, no one in the room was waiting for him to understand in order to earn the right to keep living. The conversation did not end with shouting, forgiveness, or an embrace. It ended with 3 adults sitting in a small room finally calling the truth by its proper name. And upstairs, a child was sleeping, not knowing that that night, 2 women had begun rebuilding the first boundaries to protect her childhood from the secrets of adults. Adrian left the flower shop as the rain began to thin. No one ran after him. No one called his name again. The pale blue door closed behind him with a very soft sound. But to Evelyn, that sound felt like the first period placed after a sentence that had gone on for far too long, not the final ending, not yet. But at least it ended the evasive conversations, the circular explanations, the gray spaces Adrian had once used to keep everyone exactly where he wanted them. Mara stood behind the counter, both hands resting on the tabletop. She did not cry. Evelyn did not cry either. Both of them had lived through a day too long for tears to feel available. Inside the shop, the scent of dried lavender and pressed flower paper was still as gentle as before. The frames on the wall rested quietly beneath the yellow light, preserving the shapes of petals that had once lived in the sun. Evelyn gathered the papers and placed them into the document bag. She moved slowly, carefully, as if the order of the pages could help keep her heart from spilling further. Mara looked at her, then said quietly, "I do not know what he will do after 7 days." Evelyn zipped the bag. "Neither do I. But for the first time, what he does no longer decides our entire lives." Mara looked upstairs, where Sophie was sleeping. "I just want her to have peace." Evelyn nodded. That sentence needed nothing more. It was the simplest truth in this entire story. That night, Evelyn returned to the hotel through streets damp with rain. Charleston at night was soft, glittering beneath the streetlights. The pastel walls, wooden window frames, and potted plants on balconies all looked strangely peaceful. But Evelyn had learned that outward peace did not reveal the whole life inside. There were houses filled with light but full of silence. There were marriages celebrated by others but empty of truth. There were women who thought they were rivals, until they realized they were only standing on different sides of the same wound. The next morning, Evelyn woke early. There were no messages from Adrian, no missed calls. Strangely, that silence did not frighten her. It felt like a pause, a small blank space in which no one was pulling her into another explanation. She put on a light coat and walked outside. There was no specific destination. Her feet simply carried her through streets still wet from the rain, past porches covered in climbing flowers, past the smell of fresh pastries and newly brewed coffee. At last, she stopped at a small park near the water. Old oak trees cast shade over the path. A few children were playing near the grass, their laughter rising into the gentle morning. Evelyn sat down on a bench. She looked at her hand. The finger where her ring had once been was now bare. At first, that emptiness had hurt her. Now, it helped her breathe. Not because she was no longer sad, but because her sadness was no longer being forced to disguise itself as patience. A small voice came from her right. "Miss Evelyn!" Evelyn looked up. Sophie stood a few steps away, wearing a yellow coat and carrying a small drawing bag. Beside her was the older woman who had often picked her up, probably a close neighbor of Mara's. The woman looked at Evelyn with caution but not coldness. Sophie smiled shyly. "I saw you from across the street." Evelyn stood very gently. "Hello, Sophie." The older woman stepped closer. "Mara knows I brought her to the park. If this is not convenient, we can keep walking." Sophie looked at Evelyn with clear brown eyes. "Can you walk one circle with me? Just one circle." Evelyn hesitated. She did not want to cross Mara's boundary. She did not want to confuse Sophie further. But she also saw a small hope in the child's eyes. Not demanding, only wishing to be treated like someone trying to understand her world. "If she agrees," Evelyn said, looking at the older woman. The woman considered it, then nodded. "One circle around the park. I will sit on that bench." Sophie immediately stepped forward and took Evelyn's hand. The child's hand was small, warm, and trusting enough that Evelyn almost did not dare to hold it back. She walked slowly beside Sophie, letting the girl set the pace. "Daddy came last night," Sophie said. Evelyn kept her voice soft. "I know. Daddy talked with Mom and you, then Daddy left. Mom came up to my room and thought I was asleep, but I was not really asleep yet." Evelyn paused for a beat. "Did you hear much?" "Not much. I only heard Mom sounding very tired. Daddy sounded tired too, but not like when people are angry, more like when people are telling the truth and do not know what to do afterward." The sentence was so precise that Evelyn felt her heart tighten. Children do not need to understand every word to understand the air around them. They read pain through footsteps, through doors closing, through the silence after a question. Evelyn sat down on a nearby stone bench. Sophie sat beside her, placing the drawing bag on her lap. "The grown-ups are trying to make things clearer," Evelyn said. "Not to make you worry, but so later you do not have to guess so much." Sophie looked down and opened her bag. "I do not like guessing, but I have to guess a lot." Evelyn did not answer immediately. She knew that if she said too much, she might accidentally place things inside Sophie's heart that the child was not meant to carry. So she only said gently, "I hope from now on you will have to guess less." Sophie took out a yellow-covered notebook. She opened it page by page. Children's drawings appeared, colorful but also full of empty spaces. A blue house with Mara and Sophie. A man standing near the door holding a bag. A city with many windows. Boston written above it in slanted letters. Then Sophie turned to a page that made Evelyn fall silent. There were 3 houses in the picture. One blue house, one gray house, one white house. In the blue house were Mara and Sophie. In the gray house, Adrian stood alone. In the white house, a dark-haired woman stood by a window. Between the 3 houses were small roads, but some of the roads were broken in places, as if the person drawing them did not yet know how to connect everything. "Is this me?" Evelyn asked. Sophie nodded. "You are in the white house. Mom is in the blue house. Daddy is in the gray house because Daddy does not know where he is supposed to be." Evelyn looked at the picture for a long time. There was no accusation in those lines, only the way a child tried to arrange adults into a world she could understand. "Are you angry with me?" Evelyn asked softly. Sophie shook her head. "No. You did not make the mess. Daddy made the mess. But Mom says I should not hate Daddy because Daddy loves me too. I think maybe Daddy really loves me, but he does not know how to make other people feel safe." Evelyn felt her eyes grow hot. Sophie's words were not bitter. They were painfully clear. "I think you are right," Evelyn replied. "Some people love, but they still have to learn how to act more clearly. And adults have to take responsibility for that, not you." Sophie looked at her. "Are you sad because of my daddy too?" Evelyn was silent for a moment. She did not want to lie, but she also did not want to place adult pain on Sophie. "I was very sad," she said. "I'm still sad now, but I'm learning not to let sadness decide everything." Sophie thought for a moment, then took colored pencils from her bag. She turned to the final blank page of the notebook and drew a small flower growing from a crack in the ground. The petals were yellow, the stem was green, the lines slightly shaky but bright. Underneath, she slowly wrote, "Do not stop blooming." Sophie tore out the page and handed it to Evelyn. "This is for you. Mom says pressed flowers stay beautiful because people preserve them carefully. But I think it is better if flowers can still grow." Evelyn accepted the drawing with both hands. Something soft and warm spread through her chest. It did not erase the pain, but it made the pain feel less alone. "Thank you, Sophie." When they returned to the park gate, Mara was already standing there. There was worry on her face, but when she saw Sophie calmly holding Evelyn's hand, her eyes softened. Sophie ran to show her mother the drawing she'd given. Mara looked at Evelyn, as if silently asking whether everything was all right. Evelyn gave a very small nod. "She knows more than we thought," she said when Sophie ran toward the older woman. Mara watched her daughter. "I know. I just wish she did not have to understand so early." Evelyn held the drawing in her hand. "From now on, the best thing we can do is not make her understand more by guessing. Let the adults speak clearly to one another. And with Sophie, let us speak through stability." Mara nodded. There were tears in her eyes, but this time, behind the tears, was resolve. "Whatever Adrian chooses," she said. "Whatever Adrian chooses," Evelyn answered. When Evelyn left the park, sunlight had risen through the oak trees. Charleston was softly bright, humid, and green. In her bag was Sophie's drawing, a flower growing from a crack. "Do not stop blooming." Evelyn walked slowly. For the first time in many days, she did not feel like someone merely left behind in a sad story. She was someone learning how to step out of it, not through hatred, not through noise, but through truth, boundaries, and a gentleness strong enough not to harm the innocent. There were still 7 days of waiting ahead. But inside Evelyn, something had changed. She was no longer waiting for Adrian to decide her worth. That thought followed Evelyn back to Boston on an afternoon covered in pale clouds. The city was still cold, still solemn, still lined with gray stone houses standing silent, as if no life had ever fallen apart behind their windows. But Evelyn was different now. She no longer entered Boston as a wife trying to hold on to a marriage. She entered as a woman preparing to leave a room that had gone too long without light. 7 days after the conversation in the flower shop, Evelyn did not return to the Beacon Hill house to live. She only went back there with Daniel to collect the things she needed. A few old books from her mother, several photographs of the Harper family, a wool coat she loved, the small box holding the pearl brooch, and Sophie's drawing, the yellow flower growing from a crack, which she carefully placed between 2 pages of a book so it would not crease. Daniel helped her pack things into boxes. He did not say much. Sometimes the silence of family is its own form of protection. He did not push her to be strong. He did not make her tell the story again. He did not ask her to be happy because she had left. He was simply there, lifting heavy boxes, checking the windows, calling the car, and now and then looking at her as if to make sure his sister was still standing. Evelyn's new apartment was in Cambridge, much smaller than the Beacon Hill house. There was no curving wooden staircase, no living room decorated to impress guests, no chair carrying Adrian's shadow. There were only white walls, large windows overlooking trees waiting for spring, and a quietness that did not force her to wonder what was being hidden. On her first night there, Evelyn placed the pearl brooch inside a desk drawer. She did not throw it away. She did not display it either. It was no longer a symbol of Whitmore honor. To her, it was a reminder that even the most beautiful things needed to be held under real light. After that, she placed Sophie's drawing on her desk. The small flower in the picture leaned toward the sun, childlike in its lines, but strong. Beneath the drawing were the words, "Do not stop blooming." Evelyn looked at it for a long time. She had once thought healing would come from a complete apology from Adrian, or from some late admission by the Whitmore family. But it turned out that what held her steady was not an apology. It was a child's reminder that some things could still grow from places that had once cracked open. On the morning of the 8th day, Adrian came. He texted first. Only one short line. He wanted to meet to bring over documents, if she agreed. Evelyn read the message, then forwarded it to her lawyer. Clara West, a woman with a dry voice and sharp eyes, replied that Evelyn could meet him if she felt safe, but she should keep the meeting brief, clear, and focused only on procedures. Evelyn agreed. When the doorbell rang, she no longer felt her heart drop the way it once had. She opened the door. Adrian stood in the hallway. He looked more tired than he did in her memory. Stubble along his jaw, a wrinkled coat, eyes hollow from many sleepless nights. But what Evelyn noticed most was that he no longer carried the posture of a man trying to control the room. He stood there like someone who understood he could only enter if she allowed it. "Hello," he said. "Hello." She stepped aside. "Come in. Just for a few minutes." Adrian entered the apartment. His eyes moved over the small space. The new wooden table, the stack of books not yet arranged, the cup on the windowsill, Sophie's drawing in a simple frame. He stopped when he saw the yellow flower. "She gave that to you." Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Adrian looked at the drawing for a little longer. There was something like pain in his eyes, but this time Evelyn did not rush to carry it for him. He placed a folder of papers on the table. "I signed the preliminary agreements. My lawyer will work directly with Clara. I will not contest the Beacon Hill house. If you want to sell it, I agree. If anything needs further review, I will provide the documents." Evelyn looked at the folder but did not touch it. "And the Whitmore Foundation." Adrian inhaled. "I have stepped down from the board during the internal review. The support payments in Charleston will be reviewed. From now on, any support for Sophie will go through a clear agreement between me and Mara. Not through the foundation, not through my mother, not through any path that could make Mara feel controlled." It was the first time Evelyn had heard Adrian say Mara's name without avoiding it, and Sophie's name without placing the child inside secrecy. She did not know whether that change would last. She also no longer needed to place her future on the answer. He continued, "I am moving to Charleston, but not to live with Mara. She made it very clear that her home belongs to her and Sophie. I rented a small apartment near Sophie's school. I will pick her up and drop her off according to the schedule. On the weekends that are mine, I will be there. If I am not certain I can keep a promise, I will not make it." Evelyn listened. She no longer felt the sharp anger she had felt before, only exhaustion and a cautious kind of relief. Adrian may have had to lose too much to learn something he should have known from the beginning. But if that lesson helped Sophie wait less, in worry, then at least something right was being built from the ruins. "Mara agreed," she asked. "She agreed to the schedule, not to me, and I understand." That answer made Evelyn look at him longer. "Do you really understand?" Adrian lowered his head. "I am learning. Maybe too late. But I'm learning that loving someone does not give you the right to make their life unclear." Inside the small room, that sentence landed softly, not enough to repair the past, but enough to mark a new truth. Evelyn did not need him to become perfect. She only needed him to stop using complexity as a place to hide. "And us," Adrian said quietly. "I know there is no longer an us in the old sense, but I want to say one thing. I'm sorry for taking so many years from you in something incomplete. I'm sorry for making you doubt yourself." Evelyn was silent. A part of her had once longed for that apology so deeply that she thought she would cry if she ever heard it. But when it came, she only felt calm, perhaps because she was no longer waiting for it to give her permission to leave. "I hear you," she said, "but I cannot live the rest of my life around your apology. I need peace. And to have peace, I need distance." Adrian nodded. His eyes reddened, but he did not use tears to hold her there. "I understand." He walked to the door. Before stepping out, he turned back. "Evelyn, I hope one day you will no longer hate me." She looked at him, not tenderly, but not bitterly either. I do not want to spend too much time hating you. That would still be a way of keeping you in my life. I just want to be free. Adrian nodded again, then left. The door closed. There was no hard slam, no tragic final line, only a small, clear sound, like a sheet of paper being turned to its other side. 1 month later, the divorce process moved forward in order. The Beacon Hill house was put on the market. Beatrice no longer called Evelyn. All communication went through lawyers. Daniel said the Harper family was ready to be there for her any time. But for the first time, Evelyn did not feel as if she needed to run somewhere to be rescued. She knew she was loved. But she also knew she could live alone. Mara texted occasionally. Not long messages, not overly intimate, just clear lines. Sophie is doing better this week. Adrian picked her up on time. She asks fewer questions now. Thank you for keeping everything calm. Evelyn often read those messages twice. Not because she and Mara had become close friends. They did not need to force that relationship into something beautiful too quickly. Between them was a respect created from pain, and that was real enough. One early spring afternoon, when the trees outside the Cambridge window had begun to turn pale green, Evelyn's phone rang. A video call from Mara. She answered. Mara appeared on the screen, standing inside the flower shop. Then Sophie squeezed into the frame, smiling brightly. Miss Evelyn, I added more to the drawing. The little girl held up the picture. The yellow flower still grew from the crack, but now it had 2 green leaves. Behind it were 3 houses, no longer with broken roads between them. Instead, there were 3 separate roads, clear and not overlapping, but enough for the people in the picture to know where they were going. It is beautiful, Evelyn said. Sophie smiled. Mom says this summer we might come to Boston for a day. If you want, we can go to the park, not to be some kind of family or anything, just to take a walk. Mara looked slightly embarrassed in the background. If you feel comfortable. Evelyn looked at mother and daughter through the screen. The old pain was still there, but it no longer filled the entire room inside her. It had moved back, making space for something else. A possibility. A future that did not need to be defined too quickly. I would love to take a walk, Evelyn said. Sophie cheered and ran out of the frame. Mara looked at Evelyn, her eyes gentle and tired, but honest. Thank you. Evelyn shook her head. We are all learning how to do the right thing. The call ended. Evelyn set the phone down, then looked at Sophie's drawing on the table. She picked up a green-colored pencil and drew one small leaf beside the flower. Outside, spring was arriving very slowly. Not loudly. Not brilliantly, all at once. Just small green shoots, thin strips of sunlight, and a wind less cold than yesterday. Evelyn stood by the window and smiled. She'd lost a marriage, an illusion, and many years of doubting herself. But she had found the most important thing again. The right to trust her own feelings. The right to say no. The right to step out of a story that no longer deserved her. If Evelyn's story made you fall silent for a few seconds, maybe it is because this is not only a story about a broken marriage, it is the journey of a woman learning to listen to her own instincts, face the truth with calm, and choose to walk away from a place that no longer gives her peace. What is most memorable is not the pain, but the way Evelyn handled that pain. She did not choose noise. She did not choose to hurt the innocent. She chose clarity, self-respect, healthy boundaries, and a future decided by her own hands. If you have ever had to begin again, if you have ever had to choose yourself after a long time of enduring in silence, leave a comment saying, I choose myself. If this story touched you, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to emotional, dramatic stories that always move toward truth, healing, and hope.